Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. It is once again me, Zach, here today with another Deep Rock Galactic tier list video for your viewing pleasure. In this video, we are going to be discussing the planetary regions and/or biomes contained within Hoxus in Deep Rock Galactic. I am going to be listing these based mostly off of my own opinion of them and how much I enjoy playing missions within them, how much I like them, either visually or in terms of actually having to play in them. And we are going to be discussing what crafting materials are found in each, which is sort of middling value, but might be helpful to somebody. Like I said, this is mostly opinion-based, however, as in keeping with the Deep Rock Galactic beer tier list that I did a little while ago, I am going to be trying to include a little bit of a mechanical side to this as well, giving you some input based off of my experiences. In this case, I'm going to be slightly approaching a comment/question I received on the Deep Rock Galactic weapon tier list video, which is that people were asking if I could put the movement tools of each class into a tier list as well. I don't really think that deserves its own video, so we're going to be talking mostly about the movement abilities of each class here, because which biome you're playing in has a strong influence on how useful any given movement tool is. Alright, so out of each biome, or I guess out of each class, I have picked two biomes that I think are particularly good for that class. And we are going to talk about them, and then we're going to talk about the movement abilities of the class a little bit on top of that. Keep in mind, when I am giving a summary of these biomes, it's not going to be exhaustive, and I am not going to go into all the details of every hazard in every biome in this video. There are plenty of other videos that do that better. We're going to try and keep this a little bit more focused. I will give a summary of important hazards when it is obvious and relevant to the discussion, and I'm going to tell you what crafting materials or what unique minerals are found in each one, so that you guys know. So because there are 10 biomes, and there are 4 classes, there are obviously 8 biomes that I would consider to be kind of uniquely good for different classes, and then there are 2 biomes that I think are fairly neutral. So to start with, we're going to talk about the 2 that I picked out for Engineer, starting with Dense Biozone. Dense Biozone is an interesting area, very, as you could guess from the name, dense in bio stuff. It has a lot of baby eggs, is mostly what that means. Now, talking about crafting materials before we really get into this, the most important one is the abundant mineral. In this case, it is bismore. The scarce mineral is umanite. As somebody who is chronically low on bismore, I really appreciate this. Thank you, DRG devs. Dense Biozone is great. 10 out of 10 area. However, what makes this region uniquely good for Engineer? Well, it has a fair bit of verticality, but also a fair bit of kind of clustered regions. You can kind of even see in this picture here, if you really squint and lean in close. While there is a fair bit of verticality even in this image here, it's still pretty dense, right? So while Scout gets a decent amount of use out of his grappling hook in this region, and drillers can dig around, ziplines can be sometimes helpful, generally the flexibility of the platform gun takes center stage here. In addition to that, areas like Dense Biozone that have a lot of bugs to contend with that are kind of like just ambiently there, it's nice to have the platforms to funnel bugs where you want them to go via repellent additive, or if you're running one of the, or not one of, but if you're running the new turret arc microconductor and not using repellent additive, it's still nice because that will clear out a lot of the babies for you pretty ammo efficiently. So overall, Engineer pretty solid on Dense Biozone. A pretty decent overall biome for sure. Now, overall, I would say that my personal opinion on Dense Biozone puts it into the good category. I like Dense Biozone. It has a kind of dried out sea vibe with like big coral and stuff growing around. And the fact that my favorite class is good in it, you know, that helps a little bit. No, I'm biased, so what? It's my opinion tier list. I'm sorry. But what keeps it from being too much higher than that is it doesn't have the most interesting kind of formations or anything like that. The coral is cool, but honestly, there's a lot of real life coral that are more crazy looking than the stuff that we get in game. And for whatever reason, Dense Biozone has one of the higher rates of cursed cave gen. I don't know why. Most of the cave gen in it seems pretty simple, but every now and then it just shits out a real banger of a level. That being said, it's good. It's not great. So, there it is. The second biome that I would consider the engineer to be particularly good at is fungus bogs. Fungus bogs is abundant in Crappa and scarce in Jades, which are, in my opinion, pretty common gems to find. So, not really winning any awards with those two. Now, fungus bogs, why is it good for engineer? It doesn't have a ton of verticality. Every now and then you get a bigger room in fungus bogs, but even then, again, if you kind of squint here, you can kind of see it. Even its more wide open areas tend to be kind of cramped. Not always, but oftentimes. And that makes the platform gun good. But there's a lot more to fungus bogs than that. The unique hazards here are actually pretty common. Poison, extremely prevalent, and poison is exactly the element that the engineer takes half damage from, meaning you can easily walk through a field of mushrooms and not kill them because you don't care about the poison that they do, and I often keep them around to then explode them later. In addition, the pits of slowing goop that exist, they're not even really pits, they're just like areas of the floor. You can build platform bridges over top of them and avoid the slow pretty much entirely. I mean, the slow is kind of dopey. The way that it will kind of glitch through platforms sometimes is annoying. But the fact that you have any answer to the goop definitely helps quite a bit. Overall, engineer, very solid pick on any kind of fungus bogs mission, consistently. However, how do I feel about fungus bogs? Me personally, this guy, it's my favorite biome in the entire video game. I fucking love it. It is gross. It is atrocious to slog through if you are not an engineer, and I love that. I love how painful it is to get through at times, and the fact that it does not have 3-hit terrain, 10 out of 10. Perfect biome. Love the vibe. Love swamps and swampy areas in games anyway. So even though it's maybe a little bit of a stereotypical location compared to some of the other places we'll get into, I can't help but love it, frankly. Now, next up, let's talk about the Driller. Now, the Driller, we're going to start with Crystalline Caverns here. Now, Crystalline Caverns is abundant in Jades and scarce in Bismore, which is pretty good. Jades I have a love-hate relationship with. Sometimes I have an astronomical amount, sometimes I have like 3 and a paperclip, and that's it. But the Bismore is nice to have, absolutely. Crystalline Caverns is good for the Driller, specifically because it is 3-hit terrain, first and foremost. Having a Driller on any kind of 3-hit terrain mission is great, because it's so convenient to just let him do all the digging, or do it yourself if you are the Driller. But in addition, the Driller has an easier time circumventing and avoiding, or even C4ing, the electric crystals that plague this biome. I hate them. I hate the electric crystals. They hurt me. They make me feel bad. Not a fan. In addition to that, though, Crystalline Caverns has, in my personal experience, and this might be anecdotal, this might not be true of how the cave actually generates, the most cramped, tightest tunnel systems in the game, to the point where I often find Crystalline Cavern caves connecting larger rooms sealed off with crystals and even straight up just rock, like 3-hit terrain just blocking your path to the next area. I don't enjoy that. all that much, unless I am dealing with a driller either on my team or, of course, one that I am playing with myself. I would actually argue that this is possibly the Scout's weakest biome, because of how cramped and tight it is and how there's just not much verticality and often very little space for you to maneuver. It's certainly okay in the right situations. Scout's good on any map, as are all of the dwarves, but speaking purely of the movement abilities of the Scout, the grappling hook just really takes a back seat to a lot of the other ones here. The engineer can use his platforms to funnel bugs to the right areas, and when there are weird moments of verticality, he doesn't really struggle with them. And while the gunner's mobility is mostly worthless in Crystalline Caverns 90% of the time, his shield gets mega value in those tight tunnel fights. But really none of them compete with the fact that the driller is already great in tunnel fights. He can make his own tunnels, he can expand existing tunnels, he can easily tear through the 3-hit terrain. It's just very convenient to have a driller around. That being said, Crystalline Caverns is donkey doo-doo and I hate it. Big anti-fan of that one. Even when playing driller, I don't have a good time in Crystalline Caverns. I don't know what it is. It's 3-hit terrain, it's lightning crystals, it's sad, I don't love it. For whatever reason, though. And again, I don't know if this is really a thing, but it does seem like you get a lot more gems when you go there. So maybe it is true what it says about having abundant deposits of valuable minerals. Either way, it's one of my least favorite. The only things that I can say about it, other than that you get a lot of minerals when you go here, is it is pretty well lit. It has like glowing blue crystals and the lightning crystals themselves, which is sometimes kind of handy, but overall, not a fan. So next up, let's talk about the... I almost skipped straight to the gunner for some reason. My brain just short-circuited, and you guys got to see that live. Whew, let's skip to the next best driller biome. And that is, of course, Magma Core. Now, I did have a little bit of debate here, because there is another 3-hit terrain biome, which, you know, technically Driller's always good into those kind of missions, but overall, I think that Magma Core is possibly the most quintessentially Driller of all of the biomes. It is abundant in Magnite, scarce in Crappa. Magnite's pretty cool, Crappa's whatever, but obviously Magma Core has a lot of fire in it. It has explodey fire, it has bursty fire, and it has bugs that resist fire, because they are assholes, you see. Overall, Magma Core is a shithole. But Driller resists fire by 50%, and it, in addition, is straight up immune to the tiny fire geysers. He just doesn't take damage from them, which is cool, but like, I wish I could not take fire damage from them as an engineer. It really makes me feel bad. What makes Magma Core kind of interesting is that every class, in terms of their mobility tools, is actually pretty good in this area. I sort of hesitated to put Driller as top Magma Core guy, because sometimes you get like these weird, you can even see one here, these weird like jutting bridges and stuff, like tons of verticality, where a scout or a zipline, sometimes even a platform staircase is better than drilling up to them. But overall, I still do think that Driller takes this one because being immune or resistant to the hazards of the biome allows him to much more safely perform these actions compared to the other dwarves. The only real bummer about this zone for him, the only thing that's actually he's not good with, is that C4 is bad in Magma Core. You can do it, but whoo buddy, it makes lava terrain, and that sucks. That's not good. Makes me feel bad. Overall, though, Magma Core, really dangerous, shitty place. Don't like going there without a driller. And in terms of my personal position on it, I have come around to it being neutral, but that is all the higher it will probably ever go. Lots of bad experiences on Magma Core, but quite good for drillers. Next up, I say we talk about Gunner. Now, Gunner is in kind of an interesting spot. Most people would consider Gunner, to have the worst mobility tool in the game. And I think that by and large that is somewhat true, unfortunately. Gunner is kind of lacking in overall mobility in a way that the other classes are not. The benefits of the zipline are that it gives you fall protection for a bit. Even after you have gotten off the zipline, the buff lasts until you take fall damage. That can be quite helpful. It's very good at moving down into areas very rapidly but safely, which is also kind of nice. And of course, the biggest thing is any teammate can use your zipline, which is quite helpful. The problems with it are it's slow to go up with, and that's even if you get good at the kind of like hopping that you can do on it, the zipline hop. But overall, Gunner, his mobility, kind of in a weak spot. It counterbalances the fact that he has some of the strongest utility moves in the game, or utility move in the game, in the form of his energy shield. But in terms of biomes that he excels in, there is a heavy amount of verticality within them, and more importantly, a lot of cursed terrain that zip lines are helpful for getting around. Because otherwise, why not just drill a path down, or make a platform staircase downwards? Well, the answer is sometimes it is just not really an option for you. And the first of these areas is Glacial Strata. This is abundant in Magnite, scarce in Umanite, and as just mentioned, this is a solid Gunner biome because it has a lot of cursed terrain and a lot of weird forms of verticality, often multi-leveled areas within the same room. That being able to zipline between is quite good. Glacial Strata contains, as you can probably guess from the picture of it and the name, Glacial, a ton of ice. It has a lot of snow, as well as some movement impairing snow piles that will slow you down. You get frozen. It's a real pain in the ass. Generally speaking, I would argue that the engineer is probably second best in this area because platform staircases are quite helpful, and you can platform on top of snow to mitigate it, which is quite handy. But overall, zip lines are fantastic to have in Glacial Strata. Scout does pretty well in this area in addition to that, because lots of verticality and lots of movement capabilities, but things like the Blizzard can slow you down at times when you don't want to be slowed down as Scout and might get you killed. And all of the little movement impairing things are just unfun to play with. For me personally, I'm going to put this into the good category. I like Glacial Strata's aesthetic. I just don't find it quite as unique as some of the other biomes, frankly. Obviously, it feels very unique the first time you go there, but it feels kind of repetitive in terms of the aesthetics versus like Fungus Bogs. You know, Fungus Bogs is a swamp, so you get like rock, you get dirt, you get trees, you get plants growing everywhere. Glacial Strata basically is just snow, ice, and these little hot springs. And that's it. It just repeats that over and over again. There are some rock terrain features and stuff, but overall, it's just kind of to me. It's not terrible, it's not super unfun to play, but it can be irritating at times, is how I will phrase it. Next up is the other Gunner, not Soldier, Gunner. Not making that mistake again. Preferred biome, which is Hollow Bow. Hollow Bow has probably the most infamous reputation of any biome within my personal friend group of being a shit place to live and fight. I don't exactly share that opinion. We'll get there. The most abundant resource here is Jadis, and the scarce resource is Bismore, which is a decent combination for sure. In terms of unique hazards, you got spikes, and long, terrible falls. There's a lot of spiky plants here that can really chip damage you. It's a real pain in the ass. Not a huge problem for any of the dwarves to deal with to be clear. The long falls to your death are the things that make this a great area for the gunner, because this region is just full of pits. Just full of pits. And having a zipline can be very helpful for your entire team. There's often areas where if a driller tried to dig down, would really just be a pain in the ass the whole way. Unsurprisingly, I do think that Engineer is really solid in this biome if you're playing in a team situation, because again, platform staircases are good for getting you out of those pits, but ziplines are a bit more convenient, both getting in and out a lot of the time. Scout can do pretty well in these areas, but Hollowbow does tend to have some really weird, cramped regions, just full of spikes and death. Sometimes even having parts of the cavern kind of closed off with the spiky plants themselves, which can be a real pain in the ass. So, I pretty much don't like playing Hollowbow unless we have a either gunner or engineer. I have done it, and it's not like a big deal. Anybody can be played anywhere at any time, but for my own personal comfort, I prefer having a gunner around for ziplines. In terms of my personal opinion, this is a great biome. I love Hollowbow. I think Hollowbow has a great aesthetic. Everything is bark and alive. It's all plant-based. There's a lot of terrible things, like plants will scream at you when you kill them. That's weird, you know? I don't think we really talk about that often enough in this community. The plants feel pain and scream at you, which is a thing in real life. Like, plants scream when you hurt them, but I don't have to hear it. I hear it in this game, and it's upsetting. I don't like it, you know? Just a big fan of how it looks. The amount of cursed terrain you get in it is fun. The amount of verticality in some of the rooms is crazy. Some of the rooms I've seen in Hollowbow could fit like 2 or 3 rooms in dense biozone or fungus bogs. It's wild. And it's so dangerous. There's so much chip damage. Big fan of this one. Now, next up would be the two that I think are particularly good for the Scout, the boy, the legend himself. Starting with the one that I was the most iffy about, I think, in terms of putting it as one of the Scout's strong biomes. It's Salt Pits. Salt Pits is an interesting region without really a ton of unique hazards at all. There are like some unique bug spawns and stuff, but outside of that, nothing, really. But that's kind of nice for the Scout. Not having to worry about chip damage really frees you up to just run around and either deal with bugs or play the objective. The terrain not being 3-hit is really nice for the Scout as well. Gives him an added layer of flexibility when he's out and about. That's always quite good. And while it is true that Salt Pits has some tight tunnels, which is part of the reason I was going to say maybe it's not one of the best for Scout, it does also have, as you can see in this picture here, lots of big open rooms. But unlike a lot of the other regions we've talked about, like Glacial Strata and Hollowbow, Salt Pits is not as cursed a lot of the time, and has a tendency to have vertical areas with multiple platforms kind of naturally built on them. Right, you can sort of see there's some crystals jutting out all over the walls here. Glacial Strata, even if there is a crystal or an icicle in this case jutting out from the wall, half the time you'll just slide off it. Not even because it's made of ice, just because the game is dopey. And a lot of the stuff you can land on in Hollowbow has spikes. And in Magma Core, it's on fire or has explodey plants on it. So Salt Pits is just very comfortable for Scout. It's just a very nice, relaxing kind of vibe the whole way through. Even if stuff is in your way, it's generally 1 or 2 hits to get through it. Not a big deal. Not nearly as frustrating as some of the other biomes here. So overall, that's what my takeaway is. Playing Scout in Salt Pits feels like a nice, relaxing vacation to me. In terms of how much I like Salt Pits, I am neutral on it. And in fact, I would put it slightly above Magma Core, if we're doing that, which I think we will. Salt Pits is just kind of boring to me. It is the most neutral of the neutrals. I do have some negative feelings towards Magma Core, and a handful of positive. Salt Pits, I forget it exists sometimes. Oops. Now, for the final scout-focused and really class-focused biome. Oh, wait, I didn't say what is in salt pits. Oops. My bad. Let me just scroll back up here because I got it over on the side. Alright, it is abundant in Inner Pearl. Inner Pearl is good. That is the biggest thing about this biome that I like. Because I used to never have Inner Pearl. Now I do, but I used to not. It is scarce in Bismore as well, which I am always out of Bismore, so... maybe I should go to salt pits more often. Maybe I should remember it exists, because it seems like if I went there, I'd have everything that I need in life. Oh well, I won't. Next up is Sandblasted Corridors. Sandblasted, I think, is possibly the best scout-focused biome, I guess. It is abundant in the Inner Pearl, scarce in Magnite. Get that out of the way first, so I don't forget. Sandblasted is unique because it has one-hit terrain. Pretty much everywhere. As you can see, there are these rocky formations that stick out. Those are, you know, not one-hit terrain, but all of the sandy parts are. That makes it very easy for you to, you know, grapple to minerals on the wall and have a nice little cubbyhole to hide in. It is very nice to jump around because it tends to have a lot of big open areas. Even like it sometimes has tight tunnels even that are blocked off, but they're blocked off with sand, so who cares? It doesn't really matter. It might be the worst biome to be a driller, only because you feel like you're wasting drill ammo by ever using it in Sandblasted. Now, that's not important. That's just how I feel in my soul. So overall, I love having a scout around whenever we do Sandblasted Corridors, because big rooms mean lots of light is needed, and they're very helpful for that. In addition, there are often parts of Sandblasted Corridors where minerals are so high up, it would take like half of a driller's ammo just to dig up to them. And that's the kind of shit that Scout is great for. Big fan. The only real downside of this biome is that there's not a ton of outcroppings of any kind of materials. You can see there's like some rounded areas sticking out of the walls that you could maybe land on as Scout. It's not a big deal. But there's not things like in Hollow Bow, I almost called it fungus bugs, but in Hollow Bow, there's a lot of branches and stuff sticking off. In Glacial Strata, you sometimes have icicles. Crystalline Caverns, salt pits, they have, you know, actual crystals sticking off the wall, and Magma Core has these cool bridges. Sandblasted just seemingly gets a little bit less of those, but because it is one-hit terrain, it does kind of save itself in terms of effectiveness, or effectiveness of like a solo scout with no platform gun being able to land on minerals and stuff. Because it's one-hit terrain, you don't even have to power attack, which allows you to move a lot more fluidly and quickly throughout the caves. In terms of my personal opinion on it, as a biome, I'm going to put it into the good category, slightly above Glacial Strata, but below Dense Biomes. Again, much like Glacial Strata, there's really only like 2 or 3 features to this area, and you get kind of bored after a while. There's not even really like quicksand or anything. The convenience of one-hit terrain is fantastic, big fan of that. And I do like the kind of layers of sediment you can sort of see in the walls and stuff. That's all neat. Nice little touches. Big fan of the art direction of Deep Rock in general. But it's a little bit bland. What saves it is... it generally is just less cursed than Glacial Strata. So you really get to appreciate it more. And in addition to that, the lack of real unique hazards is nice sometimes to just sort of relax in. It does have the sandstorm event that takes place, but by and large, it's really not that, it's just not that big of a problem, really. The big open areas can be bad for driller sometimes, and even for engineer, because the area can be so massive that bugs are out of certain engineer build effective ranges. Same with driller. But because it's so easy to terraform You can easily make safe places for yourself. It's just a relaxing biome. It is nice to vibe in, really. Now, for the final two. These two I consider to be pretty neutral for everybody. There are some arguments back and forth for different biome class combos being particularly good, of course. But in my opinion, I think they're both pretty neutral to all the different classes. Starting with Azure Weald. Azure Weald is arguably the most beautiful biome in the game. Lots of purples, lots of blues, lots of pretty colors and flowers. It's very nice to look at. Also, sometimes difficult to see in, because bugs will blend into the ground and be hard for you to pick out in the mass of sensory overload that is happening in this biome 24/7. Azure Weald occasionally has very large open areas, and I mean massive open areas, but in my experience has plenty of tighter regions as well. The tunnel systems are sort of open, but not crazy open, and it is lacking in any kind of unique hazard. It is abundant in Crappa, scarce in Umanite, so there's that. I don't consider either of those to be super rare for me personally, so that doesn't really affect me in any way. But in general, I do like Azure Weald. I am going to put Azure Weald at the bottom of the great tier, mostly because it is so pretty. But I do not consider it to be quite as high as the other two, because oftentimes it's sort of annoying to get enough lighting in it. I will say that Scout would be the class I would say is maybe strongest, with a follow-up by Gunner, because there is a fair bit of verticality, but just as often there's no verticality or very little verticality, and you don't really need either class in particular. So again, mostly neutral, leaning towards those two if anything. And I think considered by most people in the community to be one of the more pretty biomes, and so, put it in my top however many. But then we get to Radioactive Exclusion Zone, and this one's probably the opposite in every major way except in terms of minerals, because it is abundant in Umanite. It's scarce in Ener Pearl, which Ener Pearl is nice, and it says scarce. I tend to find a lot of Ener Pearl in the Radioactive Exclusion Zone. Sort of weird. Radioactive Exclusion Zone, unlike Azure Weald, is a 3-hit terrain biome, and does have unique problems, which is mostly the giant radioactive crystals that dot the landscape here and will hurt you when you get too close. Radioactive Exclusion Zone very rarely has large rooms outside of certain mission types, but when it does, they are also quite large, similar to Azure Weald. The difference between the two is that there's not much going on in Radioactive Exclusion Zone. There's kind of a light ashy covering of everything, and there's big green crystals, but outside of that, it's just cursed terrain, the biome. Again, 3-hit terrain, fairly cursed, generally pretty dangerous, with a fair bit of chip damage. You can probably already guess where I'm going to put it, just hearing that. It's my second favorite biome, baby. I think that that's probably a pretty unpopular opinion, frankly, because it seems like most people, not a big fan of this one. But I love it. I think it's a ton of fun. It's got good verticality. It's got 3-hit terrain. Not a ton of verticality, to be clear, but good verticality. But also plenty of kind of tight, enclosed areas for tunnel fighting. Everybody feels like they get a chance to shine. There is a fair bit of dangerous chip damage in the form of the crystals, but they're not that hard to deal with, meaning that this biome feels like almost, if it weren't for the fact that Salt Pits exists as, the most bare bones, there is nothing special here biome, this would be the final destination of DRG. Because it is just very standard, very typical, and really lets everybody shine. And in fact, I think that because of the 3-hit terrain, it actually is a little bit better for all classes compared to Salt Pits. Like, you don't really need a driller in Salt Pits a lot of the time, but it's nice to have one in Radioactive Exclusion Zone by comparison. So, if I had to pick, because I mentioned it for Azure Weald, I would say that the two classes who excel in Radioactive Exclusion Zone slightly more than the others would be Engineer and Driller. Driller because of the 3-hit terrain, and the tighter parts of the map, and engineer because while there is some verticality, it's often kind of tricky and weird and not really worth a zip line, and not always great for grappling in general, but pretty good for platforms. And of course, any area with tight tunnel fighting benefits heavily from repellent additive on the platform gun. So, in general, you could lean towards those two, but you don't really have to. And in fact, I would encourage everybody to not take any of these kind of class recommendation things too far or too seriously. Every class works in every biome. But there you guys go. That's my tier list of all the different biomes within Deep Rock Galactic. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I hope that some of my thoughts on the movement capabilities of every class within these biomes is a little bit helpful. Maybe try and approach them differently, or take it as a challenge. When I say, hey, Driller can kind of struggle in Glacial Strata sometimes, say, fuck you, bet, and then just take him into Glacial Strata, run him around, and see how things go. Because, I mean, that's half the fun of the game, right? Is figuring out how to do things your own way. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget, like, comment, and subscribe if you are continuing to enjoy this DRG content. I'll have more for you guys soon. I am working on a pump action video for all of my engineer fans out there. And the, of course, Driller Overclock video will be coming out here pretty soon in the next couple of weeks. Until next time, peace.